Greetings, listeners, and welcome to The Spiritual Experience, a show where we share stories of life, love, and redemption for all of humanity on Earth. So sit back and enjoy. Try to identify with the speakers and not compare. Don't forget to subscribe on all podcast platforms. I'm your host, Jay Lewis, and here we go. All right, guys, ladies and gentlemen, his and hers, theys and thems, whoever you are, welcome back, Spiritual Experience. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. Today, we have a wonderful treat, somebody that I've known pretty much almost the whole length of my recovery. We go to meetings together, and he's a dear friend. I just called him a brother before. I meant it then. I mean it now. Everybody say hello to Mike. Mike, say hello.
Hello, everybody.
All right. So, Mike, first things first, where are you from?
I'm from Brooklyn, from here.
Nice. You got brothers and sisters, big family, small family? What's the deal?
Nope. I'm only me, which is considering my family, that's probably a good thing.
That's funny. So where in Brooklyn did you grow up?
I grew up in what's now called Kensington.
Yeah, what was it called back then?
I don't know. It was just part of Ocean Parkway. They didn't really call it much of anything, but now they've started calling it Kensington. What
was the neighborhood like back then?
It was good, It was a lot of kids. It was a little tough in spots.
Right.
It was, I had some friends I made there, and people lived in the building, and it was pretty peaceful to live there.
Cool. And what was school like for you, or was it easy? Were you a good student? You had problems fitting in?
I was a very poor student, and I know that surprises a lot of people.
That is surprising because you're a brilliant guy.
Well, my parents had originally sent me to a yeshiva,
right,
which it was obvious I hated from the very beginning, and it just half the day was Hebrew, and I just couldn't relate to it, and I started to fade away, as they were teaching, and it just sort of dragged me down as a student.
Did you knew right then, dude, I do not want to be in this school?
Yeah, I didn't really want to be there. So it was pretty obvious. At one point, the rabbi had called me over, and he said, "I notice you don't pray with the other students." And I said, "No, I don't." He goes, "Why is that?" I said, "Because I don't believe any of this." And he said, "Your parents are wasting their money." I said, "Yeah, I tell them that every day." And
it's funny.
Eventually, I got myself kicked out of there.
How old were you?
I was 12.
If you think about that, at 12 years old, to tell the rabbi, that's pretty ballsy.
It is. It was not knowing when to shut my mouth.
Right. That's funny. So what happened from there? You went to regular school after that?
I went to school after that, and I went to a public high school.
And how did that turn out?
That was okay, except I sort of slipped into a pretty bad depression somewhere in the junior year of high school.
Right.
Did
you know at that time that that's what it was, or you just thought this is teenage whatever? Or your parents, what did they think?
I don't know, but looking back at it, they were probably pretty horrified, because I know how I would feel if my son was, depressed like that. But I don't know exactly what happened. I just know that I was going into my junior year. I had gotten into this pre-med program that I didn't really want to be in, and I just froze up. I can't explain what happened. And I went into this deep, dark place. And I realized years later in therapy, when I was talking to a therapist, I said, "You mean that I failed out of there on purpose?" And he always had a sarcastic wit about him. He goes, "No, Mike, I just don't think you're very good at those topics." He goes, "Yes, of course you failed out on purpose."
Wow. Yeah, it was subconsciously you were.
Probably.
Now, were you just, to think about that, I mean, number one, you have to be, in my eyes, looking back, and maybe you as an adult too, some kind of prodigy to even be accepted into one of these programs.
Well, I don't think it was that high of a standard. I think you just had to have a B average or something, so which I had. And, they took me into it. I didn't really want to be in it.
Where was it at?
At Edward R. Murrow High School.
Oh, yeah?
In Brooklyn.
Oh, it's so nice.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, that's where my youngest one goes now. But it's like a big art school. I didn't know they had medical stuff there.
well, they have a pretty wide range of things. It was a communication school at one point, but I think they dropped that now. And I think they have a music program, an art program, but they also have a pretty decent academic program now.
Right.
My son applied there, and he didn't get into that music program, but he got into another one. But he liked it a lot. So
Yeah. It's actually a very big school.
it is.
Oddly enough. So you're in this depression. What's going on?
Well, I was in a bad depression. I was terrified of drugs and alcohol because I saw everybody in my family misusing them. So I was scared of them.
Right. Meaning like your parents or your uncles, or like what was the deal?
The whole family. They were always drinking and drugging and, going blotto to get away from their life's problems.
Right.
And I was just terrified of it until I was invited to this party, and these guys were drinking, and they're like, have a drink, and I was almost standing on the other side of the room, and eventually I broke down and I had a drink, and it was like, see, now I'm understanding my parents. They had the right idea here, and that's when the drinking started.
Right.
And
Did it help initially with the depression and all the other stuff, the anxiety?
Well, it stopped the chatter in my head for a few hours. I knew that much. I knew it was probably not the right way to go about it in life. And I do remember we had a health ed class, and they brought in a recovering alcoholic to talk to the class. And
No way. What year was this?
this was like 1980.
Wow. That's pretty
81.
forward thinking.
81, yeah, no, they were. And he said you could ask any questions you wanted. And I started asking questions like, well, what's it like for your kids when you drink? And are you afraid that your kids are going to start using drugs? And, have you ever gotten violent? I was asking all these questions, and my teacher took note. And
Wow.
afterwards he said, are you okay? I said, yeah. He goes, maybe we should go talk to the council. I'm like, no. I was just asking questions, I was just curious, I really wanted to know. So.
Wow. Yeah. So that's like and when you're looking back, like, wow, that's like a signal.
It was a cry for help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a signal. Were you starting to drink all the time at that point?
No, but when I did, it was mostly like on weekends or whatever. And, I was stealing some of my parents' alcohol, and I was going out to a friend's house, and his brother was buying us weed and alcohol, and it was picking up.
Right. Now, what happens after you get out of high school?
I actually got into RPI, Rensselaer Polytech, and I was there, and I got there. I was saying, I was going to leave high school behind in the rearview mirror, and I was going to start this new life, but that didn't really work out very well. I had actually, because I had played my last year in high school, I had played on the football team.
Right.
And I was going to be on the team for the first year, at least the first year at RPI. I had gotten onto the team.
What position did you play?
Wide receiver and then safety,
Okay.
strong safety.
Wow.
And, those guys pounded down the drinking like you couldn't believe.
Really?
It was just like unreal how much they drank. And, the game was over, and they would just sometimes I couldn't wait for the game to be over.
Right.
And, and just the whole crowd there, because a lot of these like engineering students, they were what they call the whole grain alcohol nerds. Like, that's what they like to drink.
No way.
Yeah, so I got into the whole grain alcohol stuff, and it made me absolutely insane.
Please, for those who don't know, elaborate on what whole grain alcohol is.
It's grain alcohol. It's 200 proof.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
But it's like moonshine stuff, right?
Basically, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Except they call it that on the Northeast. Down south, they call it moonshine.
It's so funny. I remember, like, people would say that, I don't even know if this is fiction or whatever. They'd be like, oh, you could go blind from, like, that kind of stuff.
Probably, yeah. I could see why.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you fit right in.
Yeah. Well, Yeah, but I was still awkward socially and shy and didn't really, have any self-confidence and just, felt pretty scared most of my time there.
Yeah. So how long were you there?
About a year and a half.
And then what happened after that?
Well, I had a couple of I was not doing well scholastically. And
Is this because of drugs and alcohol?
Yeah.
Or you just like,
I just felt overwhelmed by the school. It was it was just way out of my range of what I could do.
right.
And I had a night where I got really drunk and I threw like stuff out of my dorm room. I actually threw my stereo out the window at one point. It was crazy. And they put me on probation, and then a couple other events happened, and they finally said, all right, that's it,
Right.
And I went back to Brooklyn College and I finished there.
What did your parents say?
They were upset. They were devastated. They were upset, and I guess they were worried about me. They were just hoping I could put it behind me when I went to college.
Right. What did what kind of work did they do? Did they have a business or anything?
My dad was in the garment center. Him and his dad, they had a business in there, and my mom did a lot of teaching. So,
Right. So they had high expectations.
yeah, to some degree.
Right. Yeah. So then you come out of Brooklyn. I mean, you come out of Polytechnic. You go to Brooklyn College, and you finished up there. What did you study?
Computer science.
Right. What happens after college?
Oh, I got a job in it, and I was actually doing all right for a little while, and then I started linking up with the drinking people, and started to, go back to my older ways, even though I was only 22,
Right.
and it just started to become more habitual. I don't know where or what day I crossed the line, but I reached the point where I was drinking most nights, and I hadn't really started drinking during the day yet, but I would drink in the morning just because I was shaking so much that I used to say I wasn't really drinking, I was doing maintenance.
Right.
Because I just couldn't really function. So I would have some in the morning, and then that would be, it for the week. I would come home at night, and funny thing is, through all this, I was still a gym rat, and I would go to the gym, and and I thought I was being really healthy. I went to the gym, I took all these vitamins and protein powders, and and I watched what I ate, and then I was like coming home and obliterating myself.
Right. And you were getting the shakes in the morning this early.
Yeah. Like
at 22, 23.
24, yeah, around there.
Wow. So then what happened next?
Well, it stayed up like that. I had a couple of relationships. My standard got a lot lower for people I would hang around with.
Right. Where were you living?
I was living at that point. I was living in downtown Manhattan in East Village, and I used to hang out at bars like downtown Beirut. It was called. You can just imagine what that place was like.
I can't imagine what the East Village was like. What years was this?
This was from 89 to, and I met my wife in 93, and then we moved a little further uptown. But it was kind of wild. It was.
Yeah. I mean, I was running around there like as a teenager in the mid 90s. Yeah, early to mid 90s, definitely. I was going to a lot of shows. Roseland, Irving Plaza.
Yeah.
Those places. Yeah,
those are great places.
Yeah, and on the west side, Roxy on 18th Street. Yeah, I remember Tompkins Square Park when it was like those junkies everywhere.
Oh yeah,
it was just wild.
It was.
And then so yeah, I can imagine if you're working and you're living down there.
Yeah.
And then and you're an adult now, and you can drink whenever you want.
Yeah. I went sort of wild whenever, as soon as I was no longer living at home or living away on campus, I went kind of wild.
Right.
With everything.
Right.
My standards for women went down quite a bit.
Right.
We were at one of those, I don't remember which bar it was, and there was one girl there, she was just covered in tattoos. She had a tongue piercing, a lip piercing, and She was a tattoo artist, and she had all kinds of crazy things that she did. And all my friends were like, come on, let's get out of here. I'm like, no, I want to talk to her. And you guys leave. And she became my girlfriend for a while. And you could imagine how well that was going because, she drank and she shot heroin, and it was just a mess for a few months.
Sure. And you're this computer science guy.
Yeah.
And she's like this wild child.
Yeah.
That's funny. It's good though. At least you went through that stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So you know that that's like not really for you. So how did you what happened after you left that neighborhood?
Well, I met my wife, and we moved back to Brooklyn after a few years, and
you met her and you were still drinking, obviously.
I was still drinking, but I stopped drinking for a while. But the only way I did that was by using pills and smoking pot.
Yeah, so like one for another.
Yeah, but
were you doing it all day, like pills all day, pot all day?
Yeah, and I was using combinations of things which were pretty deadly. Like I was taking Ambien and drinking. That could have like killed me, or like Valium and drinking. I could have died right then and there doing that. Yeah,
and Ambien is like, I mean, now it's like front page news that like that stuff you can go into a blackout and like walk off a bridge without drinking, just taking Ambien on its own.
Oh yeah,
not that I've never taken it, but I hear stories about that kind of stuff now. But back then you were taking that and drinking at the same time.
Yeah,
and you were just walking around doing your job.
Yeah, I was actually able to work pretty well,
Right.
I mean, I knew people knew I had a problem, but since it wasn't really affecting my work, nobody could really say anything.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, were people like trying to intervene yet, or like what was the story?
Nobody really tried to intervene that much. That came. The first time anybody tried to intervene was before I was married, and I was coming home into my apartment in the East Village, and I was just blasted a lot of the time, and I rang my neighbor's bell at night. I couldn't open up the door, and I said my roommate had locked me out, but I didn't have a roommate. It was just out of my mind.
Right.
And he opened up the door. I just couldn't turn the key. And the next day, he told me about the meetings.
Really?
And I was I just sort of gave the alcoholic nonchalant, okay, that's great that you go to them. You know, that kind of dismissive kind of conversation.
Sure.
So
meanwhile, you couldn't even open your own door.
Right. So,
at least you made it to your building.
I did.
Yeah. So you and your wife, you met her and then you guys moved back to Brooklyn?
Yeah.
What did she think about how you were living?
Well, she didn't like, by then I was just using pills and pot. I had actually come off alcohol, believe it or not. I got myself detoxed. So it was, it was not a huge improvement.
Right.
But, I wasn't as belligerent and angry and everything with it. But, I think if she had it over again and she saw what I was like in sobriety, she probably would have walked away.
Right.
If she looked back at it now, wouldn't have put herself through that again. And, I would zoned out a lot of the time. And then by then I had started a business.
Right.
After we got married, I had started a business. And I don't even know why I started it, except maybe to compete with my father-in-law, who was really rich.
Right.
And I got in there, and I just felt like, why am I doing this? And this is the wrong thing for me. And I had these... It was just a constant stream of anxiety, and I started drinking again. And I couldn't go on sales calls unless I had something in me, because I was just too socially phobic.
Right.
So I would do that. I come back, it was around lunchtime, and by then I was either like crashing or what have you. But I had people around me, they could run things, but they all knew I had a problem. They all knew.
How many people do you have working for you?
At one point, it was like 13.
That's enough people to keep an eye and say something is up over here.
Oh yeah, no,
and it's a real business. You have 13 people. It's a real business.
It was. It was. I could, for the most part. I mean, I couldn't do it. I couldn't really be a functional human being, but I could function well enough to run that. Let's put it that way. Although I'm sure it really injured my ability to do everything in life better. So.
Right. Yeah. So then what happened next?
I was starting to hit a wall, and it was like around right before 9/11, I decided I was going to stop drinking, and
You decided on your own. You're saying, okay, look.
yeah, I was going to stop drinking, and I white knuckled it for, I don't know. I got detoxed again. I white knuckled it, and then 9/11 happened, and I said, well, I can't do it now. Look what just happened to America.
Yeah. Make it about me.
Yeah,
In the same way.
Yeah.
Of course.
It takes an alcoholic personality to take a countrywide terrorist threat and turn it into a personal attack.
Sure. Yeah, they're coming to get me. Look at us. Woe was me.
Yeah. And then I didn't try it again till 2004 or 2005.
Wow. Yeah, so you stayed out there that long. So how did the bottom happen? The final bottom?
The final bottom happened when I had just hit a wall.
Like mentally? Or was like your life falling apart, your business, like the whole thing? What was going on?
Everything was falling apart. And my wife said to me at one point, I love you. I can't have a kid with you right now. Right? And my wife had surgery. She couldn't have her own kid, so we were going to have to adopt. And, and I realized, I said, this is it. It's like, I can't do this anymore. It's like, I'm not going to have any life left over. And I was already suicidal by that point. I used to wake up every morning thinking about how nice it would be to die. And, and I decided that enough was enough. And I'd been to a few meetings, and I went back to the meetings. I was going to Mustard Seed in the city at the time, which is a great, great meeting. And I had called my sponsor, and I said, I don't know what to say. I'm back. I feel really humiliated, and I'm ashamed to go to the meeting. And he said, I have a news flash for you. He goes, this is AA. We've seen relapse before.
Yeah.
I said, okay. And I went in there, and people were very supportive. And it was the first time I actually took the program seriously. It really was. It was, I don't know, something clicked in me that had never clicked before. And, I would listen at the meetings, and rather than trying to find fault with what everybody was saying or pick nits at the program, I listened to it, and I heard, people's stories of pain and struggling. And, sometimes people would give these drunkalogs which were funny, but behind that funny was pain and angst, and I never saw that before. And I never realized how much I really related to those people. And I actually made a really good attempt to do the steps, because I hadn't ever, I tried it. And, let's face it, you can sit down with the book and you can read the first step, right? Doesn't mean you taken it into your heart. You can
At all.
read it. You can read it. I read it, but this time I was actually thinking, what does it really mean to be powerless? And, what does it mean to be powerless over alcohol? Well, what I've done the last few years, that shows what it's like, and that's what it means. And I was able to work in a higher power, and I was able to get through the steps. And my life, for the first time, I had become content. It was like the first time in my life I wasn't living in constant discord and constant anger and just fuming anger at everybody. It was like the first time I had any sort of freedom.
Yeah. If you think back, this is so funny, and I say funny in a way that it's very poetic. So your attitude on life up until that point is, okay, I don't want to do yeshiva. These people, they're not like me. I don't get it. It's not for me. I don't want to do high school pre-med shit, even though I qualify and apparently they think that I can do it. This is not for me because I'm different. Same story all the way through.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you finally surrender just that ideology that maybe I do belong.
Yeah.
Right? And you do it at a meeting called the Mustard Seed, which is named after the amount of willingness that the program says you need in order to succeed. It says in the book, you just need the willingness of a mustard seed and you can have this life. So it's funny how that whole arc, and then it comes together, and that has to be God or higher power, whatever you want to call it, to make it like that, because that's what happened. Because out of nowhere, you think something clicked. Like, all of a sudden, you became willing.
Yeah, and I remember, maybe it was like my third meeting back at Mustard Seed, and the speaker got up, and he was Jewish too, and he was talking about a very, very similar story. And, he was talking about, how he had a lot of, angst towards religion and Judaism, and he was telling the stories that was similar
Rightfully
to mine.
so.
Yeah. And after I never really heard anybody tell that story, and my eyes were welling up with tears the whole time he was speaking. And I walked out with, at this point I had a coworker working for me who was in the program, and we walked out, and I'm just in silence because I don't even know what I couldn't even put a name on the feelings I was having. And he said, "Have you ever had a spiritual experience?" I said, "I think I just had one." And that was like a breakthrough moment for me.
Wow.
And it was like, after that, I just got, it was like a breakthrough moment, and I just started to get better after that. And I realized I didn't have to live that way. I didn't have to drink. I didn't have to be an asshole. Nobody was out to get me. I didn't need to defend myself against people who weren't trying to attack me. I needed to, I could just be free. And by then we had just moved to Brooklyn. I had, we adopted my son.
Yeah.
I was still in early recovery.
Right.
Because my son is 16, almost 16 and a half, and I have just a little over 17 years.
Right.
So, it was a very close setting there. And
yeah, but you were sober for a little while, and your wife must have been like, okay, I guess he's doing this thing.
Yeah. Well, people could see the change in me for one time.
Right.
And
it wasn't like temporary drying out change.
No.
It was.
I felt generally grateful that I had the program to be in, where I used to come out of there and I would mock people for their shares, and they think it's funny that they drove their car into another house, but I didn't realize they were just expressing pain.
Yeah.
They were not expressing humor.
Yeah, you were comparing, not identifying.
Yeah,
right?
I was not identifying with anybody, but it changed in that time period. And then I came back and we moved to Brooklyn, and I started going to Greenwood, where I met you.
Yeah. And you got your son.
And we got my son.
Yeah, what was that like?
Well,
even making that decision.
It was great. It was, we went to Guatemala. We had been trying for a long time to have our own. And we go to Guatemala, and everything there had to happen at 5:30 in the morning. We were absolutely exhausted. And at 5:30 in the morning, they took us there. We had to do some paperwork at 7, and the next day, and then the third day, they gave us a baby.
Wow.
And they handed it to me, and I'm like, gee, we don't even have the owner's manual. What are we going to do?
Right.
We went upstairs. He started having hiccups. We went into a panic. And it was funny. And I remember I took him home, and I'm holding him up in the air, and all of a sudden my arm starts to feel warm. My shoulder. I'm like, oh no. I said, Josh, we're off to a bad start here.
Yeah, he's peeing on you.
Yeah.
What made you go to Guatemala of all places?
We wanted to adopt, and we went to see this thing on international adoption, and they showed us this video, and the kids were just so cute and so beautiful from Guatemala.
Right.
And they looked like such friendly people there, and we decided that was the place to go.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then you bring Josh home, and now life happens.
Yeah. I was ill-equipped to be a parent.
Right.
There's no question about that. I was terrified of reproducing what my parents had done.
Right. Was that like a cognitive thought for you?
It sure was. It sure was. And, I didn't know how to parent. I was sort of in paralysis the first few months of parenting.
Were your parents still around when?
They were. They were extremely against the idea of getting a Guatemalan kid.
Right.
It was, they were very racist.
Yeah.
And they were racist, homophobic, you name it. They ran the whole gamut of any way you could hate people. That was the way they did.
Right.
And they were very against it. So I didn't really tell them until about a week before we were going, just so they wouldn't hassle me about it. And
right.
we went there. We brought them back, and they were sort of very non-committal about him in the beginning. And eventually they came on board.
Really?
Yeah. My dad was better about it than my mom. My dad was just like, he's a cute baby, and he liked him. And, we played with him. And
What was it like for you to see that change in them?
I wouldn't say it was a drastic change, but at least they seem to have accepted the situation,
That's evolution.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of like, I think they sort of realized that the only thing that was going to happen from spewing that sort of racism at me was that I wasn't going to, they weren't going to get to see their grandson. Instead of enjoying their grandson, they were holding on to ideology,
Right.
And I think they just put the ideology down, at least enough to see him. So then my dad died. We adopted Josh it was the first end of May, and we had all these. My dad had been really sick, and we had all these gifts from people for congratulating us on adopting a baby. And then my dad died 2 weeks later, and we had on one side of the table we had these gifts of people who were giving us for sorrowing for my dad. What are they called? Gifts for.
Oh, when you're sitting Shiva?
Yeah, whatever they call it. And then on the other side, we had all the celebratory stuff for having Josh, and that was a sort of weird cognitive dissonance. We had them both on the same table.
Wow. What about your mom?
She was sort of messed up about my dad dying, and she really wasn't participating much. But she kind of got more into Josh over time. And Josh is a good kid. He is. And
Yeah.
he was stubborn. Very, he was a 2-year-old.
Of course.
We'd say, Josh, come on, Josh, put your clothing on. We're going to go eat. He was going, I'm not going.
I love that.
Yeah.
You sure he's not a Jew?
I'm sure. He's right. Yeah, but he was just very stubborn, and it was really hard, and we weren't really putting down good boundaries.
Right. Oh, because you love your son.
Yeah.
And you're sober, so you have these eyes of life. You're as a sober man, we are training ourselves to always look for the cup being half full, and to lessen the blows of just regular normal life. All right, it's not a big deal. Because we're so used to making everything a super big deal that in order to desensitize that, where we can actually find life palatable, we have to program ourselves to being all right, look, let's put things in his way. If you don't want to go, then you don't got to go.
Exactly.
But as a parent, it's not easy because you have to set those boundaries.
Right.
Right. So how did you?
Well, it took us a couple of years to get better with that. And we had a therapist that I had gone to, my wife had gone to at separate times, and we called him, and he was a real solution-centered person. He goes, it sounds like you're not setting any boundaries with him.
Right.
He said, I said, well, we don't want to abuse him. He said, a kid that doesn't have any boundaries set is an abused kid, because he'll get out into the real world, he won't be able to function.
That's very true.
It is true. You have to have appropriate boundaries. You can abuse the hell out of a kid and they won't function well either. Right. But if you don't set boundaries, it's the same thing. It's the other side of it.
Yeah.
So we started getting better with boundaries and with him. And, he's grown up nicely. We've had the usual stuff. He's cut school a few times. He's 16.
How dare he?
He cut school. Well, I did too. So
yeah, of course.
It was hard for me to keep a straight face when I was talking to him about it.
Right. Now, does your wife want you to be like the disciplinarian?
I am more so than she is sometimes.
That's nice.
Sometimes he won't do something, and I'm like, Josh, just do it already, for God's sakes. I'll scream at him, a little bit screaming, but he's not very afraid of us. Let's put it that way. I don't want him to be afraid of us. That's not a healthy relationship.
No, it's funny because I remember with my the middle kid that we have, they were in high school, and it was the last day of school, and they had cut school. And Emily was so mad. It's this, I can't believe she fucking cut school, blah, blah. It's dude, it would be abnormal for a kid to go through junior high school or high school without cutting school. That's abnormal. So the fact that it's the last day and they want to ditch out, bro, that's That's regular stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And it's nice to be able to recognize that. Without the program, I would not be able to see that.
No.
I would just like, you know, as a parent, the program really taught me is that, you know, parenting is just like we say, principles before personality, right? Like when Devin was growing up, dude, if it was up to me, you could eat ice cream for dinner every night.
Right.
But I'm a bad dad if I'm doing that, and I know that we have to do things this way
Right.
in order for me to be a good parent. It doesn't mean anything more than that.
Yeah.
That, like, you know, if you make decisions, you're going to put me in a situation where I have to be like a technical dad, and that's never going to end up nice for you.
Right.
You know, you're not going to get what you want or whatever. But regardless, you know, if I'm drinking or being high or doing drugs or whatever, none of that is possible.
No.
It's just rage, right?
Yeah. And you were one of the parents I watched in the program because you're like a year and change ahead of me in the program and
Right.
time-wise. And your son was a teenager, I think, when we got in.
Yeah.
Right. And I was watching how you dealt with it. And, you know, you dealt with it in a very sober way. And that actually had an effect on me.
Thank you.
You know, you didn't rant and rave at him. You didn't, you didn't do anything really super abusive to him. You didn't try to shame him. You just plugged away at trying to help him get better. And that was something to watch.
Thank you. Because the thing is that we don't do it alone.
No.
And I think that's what the rest of the world is missing. I think that's what our parents were missing. Like, they were too embarrassed to share with either other family members or their neighbors. Like, hey, the kid's 2 years old, he got the hiccups. How do I get him to stop? Like,
Right.
just to be like the humility. Like, you know, my parents, they have no humility. Like, my parents never taught me, like, this is how we screwed up the money. Or this is how we did. Like, they never, you know, showed me those kinds of things because they were like, they weren't taught that that's okay.
Right.
You know? And the good thing is that we're allowed to teach our kids that's okay, you know?
It is.
Yeah.
And I think I was thinking about this the other day that if there's one thing that the program has meant to me is that I never have to suffer alone.
Ever.
Yeah. And there's always somebody there. There's nothing that's unique about my life that somebody there hasn't heard or seen or been involved in it. You know, and we had trouble with Josh during the pandemic. He wasn't going to school, and I called a couple of the sober parents, you know, from the program, and they're like, yeah, well, this is part of being a parent, you know, they were laughing, a couple of them. They're like, yeah, this is what you're going to deal with, and it's going to get better.
Yeah.
One day they won't think you and your wife are stupid.
Yeah.
You know?
It's so funny. And the thing is like, you know, your life also has evolved, you know, since you came in. So you had this business and the business was no longer. What did you do after the business closed?
Well, I went off doing software consulting for a few years, and I was sitting with my sponsor, and I said, what I really want to do is teach. And he said, well, why aren't you teaching? I said, that's a good question.
It's so wild how, like, the very direct, you're like, oh, I don't know. Why am I not teaching? Like, you can do whatever you want now, you know?
And I kind of had it in my head. I guess this was sort of self-esteem problem, saying, oh, I don't think anybody would want to hire me as a teacher. And, you know, I'm a programmer and this and that. And I got a call from one of the universities, and I sat down, and I was still working at the time and you know, as a consultant, and I just figured I'd go on it, what the hell. And I'm sitting there.
How long were you sober when this happened?
This happened in 2015.
Right.
When I made the change.
7 years ago.
Yeah. And I sat with her, and she asked me a couple of questions, and didn't show any emotion. And she said, well, the first class I would want you to teach is, and she starts explaining it. And she goes, by the way, I'm hiring you. Which was really nice. I'm like, you are. And they gave me an offer letter, and I gave notice at the job. And I couldn't believe it. It's like, wow, you know, this is sobriety. It's like,
somebody wants me.
Yeah, it was sobriety. It's like, I couldn't have done this when I was drinking. I wouldn't have never had the guts to go out there on that interview.
Or if you did, you would have been pilled up like me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I've done that. I've gone on interviews, blacked out, drunk, crazy, because that's what I needed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get hired, and what happens?
Well, I had they paid me to work on curriculums with them over the summer, so I did that, and I started teaching that September. But I had given notice, and I took a few weeks off. It was really nice, and went out there in September, and I was nervous of how I was going to be in the classroom. And I got up there, and I was just myself, right? This new self that I had, not this scared person who thought everybody hated me. And I gained confidence because of the friendships and relationships I built, realizing I can live a sober life, and all this shit about not deserving stuff. And, it was gone. And I could go out there and teach, and there was some problems with students cheating, and I handled that in a really sober way. It was kind of...
How do you handle that without, laughing?
Well, it was kind of...
Or without taking it personal?
Well...
Like those two extremes, like, ha, 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 or like, how dare you?
Well, I that school had a lot of cheating, which is why I changed school, and they didn't want to do anything about it.
Oh.
But I didn't know that, and two students had virtually the identical midterm submissions, and I asked them to come meet with me, and I explained that to them, and they were really apologetic, and they asked if they can have, one of them asked if they could have like a makeup assignment, and I'm like, sure, I'll be a good guy about it. And I gave them a makeup assignment, and he cheated on that. He plagiarized on that.
No way.
And I realized that, one of the other teachers said, what? They cheated and you have to get extra work? Why are you doing that to yourself?
That's
I'm
so
like,
funny.
you're right. And I needed to put a boundary down there. And I because I was a sober person, I could do that.
Right. So then you left that school and you went to another one?
Yeah. And that's where I teach now.
Wow.
And I've been teaching there since 2016.
What did you learn about yourself from when you started teaching to now?
Well, you get a lot of feedback from students. You deal with a lot of different personalities and different types.
And they're how old typically?
They're like grad students. They're usually somewhere between 22 and 27 something. And
ego.
yeah, well, they're ego, but they're scared. There's a lot of anxiety with them.
Yeah, ego just means separate.
Yeah.
Doesn't even but they're like, wow.
And it's like I can so relate to the anxiety. I can so relate to it, and I can so relate to their need to try to be perfect. I was talking to one student the other day, and she's like, I think I'm going to end up getting an A- in this class. And I said, you know what? No one's going to give a happy rat's ass what your grade point average is when you go out looking for a job.
Yeah.
She goes, are you sure? I said, positive. I worked in the workforce for 30 years, and nobody ever asked me what my average was. So...
But it's nice to be able to, identify that ailment and just be able to just be honest and give some kind of relief.
Well, yeah. I mean, I recognize the anxiety. I recognize when I'm being lied to very quickly.
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, you could have come up with a way better story than that. I could have come up with something much better than that,
It's
I was really good at that, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I like when I listen to that stuff, it's just it's comical to me. I can't. If you had to call every person out on every lie, it's like you're not even allowing them to be human.
Right.
They're already feeling stupid enough that they have to lie.
Right.
And they're already behaving stupid enough by lying.
Yeah.
And they're young, and I know what that's like.
Yeah, you're young, and we grow too soon old and too late smart, right?
That's the way it goes. All right, so let's wrap this thing up. Mike, listen, it was incredible chatting with you. You've had a nice, long, windy road, and I'm happy I'm happy that we know each other, and you're one of my brothers, man. I love you, man.
I can love you too, brother, and I couldn't imagine going through without you in my life. You've been always, we have this relationship where we've learned not to be sarcastic, but we kind of keep a little bit of that character defect just so we use on each other. Which is nice.
I think it's a Jew thing. Only Jews can do it.
Yeah.
The goy, forget it. They're too sensitive. So.
All right.
Anyway, cheers. All right, guys. Have a great day. Peace.
Thank you.
We want to thank you all for joining us today. And please don't forget to like and subscribe on all podcast platforms. and find us on Facebook where you can become part of our family. We'll see you around.